Hello, and welcome to CNET's 2023 election coverage. I'm Jeff Rushton of StateCollege.com, and today we're profiling the race for the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. And with me today is Democratic at-large candidate Omari Patterson. Omari, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, sir.
So to get started, Omari, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I have been here in the State College area, Ferguson Township specifically, for 8 years. Prior to that, spent a little bit of time in Ohio and Maryland and Boston, but growing up primarily in Maryland. I have a wonderful wife, professor at Penn State, 2 children, a 12-year-old and a 5-year-old. Doing fantastic and growing up well in the township. My background is engineering, so I went to school in Boston as an engineer. Cut my teeth a little bit in the process engineering and did a little bit of management and real estate development, specifically appraising. And now I'm currently a executive at an IT management consulting, tech consulting firm. So storied history, but very well suited, very well positioned, and kind of with that knowledge base to really be helpful to the township.
And why did you want to run for Ferguson Township Supervisor?
It starts with wanting to just help my friends and neighbors. We have a fantastic township. I think when the opportunity presented itself, there was an opening, and I wanted to step in, and this is the next logical step for me to be there for my friends and neighbors.
What do you think are the biggest challenges facing the township right now?
I think relatively, our township is awesome. Kids are growing up here nicely. My spouse enjoys it. I enjoy it. Awesome neighbors. But I do recognize that kind of the growth is always a challenge. And so I think that's one of them, kind of how do you grow effectively? How do you grow in a way that you're maintaining beauty while not kind of diminishing or taking away from kind of the needs of the community? So there's some housing needs. There's some affordable housing needs. So how do we do that in a way that isn't kind of destroying our earth or the mesh, the kind of connective tissue of where we are today? I think and maybe it's a future question, but the whole stormwater management fee. So it's the revenue versus the sources and uses of funds. What are we bringing in versus what are we spending it on? That's a challenge. It's always going to be a challenge. And then kind of those big ticket items with the COG. So when we're making kind of larger decisions within the township that other municipalities are associated with, those are always challenging.
Speaking of the stormwater fee, the township instituted that in 2021. How do you think that's worked out so far? And is there anything you would do differently or change about what's in place there?
My understanding and what I've heard from several community members is that, I think the fact that it was done during COVID made it very, very difficult on a lot of people. Folks that wanted to be more involved couldn't. And so for the way my neighborhood has dealt with it, I think we have an HOA, and so we had a really awesome board that said, wait a minute, we are doing a lot with our neighborhood to deal with stormwater. And so my neighborhood's receiving a credit for stormwater, as are several other individuals that are receiving exemptions, if you will. So I think it's working out as intended, which was, hey, we're going to raise revenue so that we can make sure we deal with this mandate. I think there's probably a little bit more transparency necessary, or clarity, maybe not transparency, clarity around the projects that are in the pipeline and the necessity of them. But I think staff writ large is doing a really good job for the circumstances and how it was implemented.
Another thing you mentioned earlier was affordable housing, and the township has made some changes to its workforce housing ordinance over the years. But what do you think can be done to improve affordable housing within Ferguson Township?
I think in general, it's that policy that always can help out, kind of working on that zoning, those kind of those carrots that'll help make things more easy to implement. And being a developer and working on affordable housing, you have to piece together those sources. It doesn't just pay for itself. So I've worked through all that. I understand it. And I've also kind of done that in another municipality, done that kind of ask of, all right, I'm going to do X number of units. So I need you to either decrease or give me more density, or decrease this, or whatever the case. It's got to be a negotiation. We all want it. It's not going to pay for itself. So I think there's ways to work through it, and I think public-private partnership is vital.
The township hasn't had a real estate tax increase since 2006. How important is it to you for that to continue? And how do you balance the desire to have low or no tax increase with continuing services at the level they are, or improving them?
It's always a dance.
Yeah.
That's for sure. The real estate tax is kind of the lifeblood, and it's fairly low. And I understand that it's fairly low because of the diversity of our community, being that we've got hundreds of acres of just bare land, and it's contributing to the beauty of Ferguson Township. So I think we just need to take a good hard look at all of the sources and all of the uses, and and get alignment on that. I mean, just a quick story. I'm with my township, or my neighborhood association. There's kind of like hey, we want, Omari, we want more people, measuring the grass of every neighborhood. I'm like, okay, we have a homeownership manager, and that they can go do that. But that cost, there's $1 per hour for that, and so there's got to be a source for that funds, and that's our homeowners fees. And so I've had those discussions, and at the end of the day, they go, yeah, that makes sense. I don't want my homeowners association fees to go up. All right, cool. So then we're aligned now. We both understand the source of funds and then the use of those funds. And, at the moment that we all are like, yes, we want to make sure that thing gets done, and it's going to cost us a little money, and we're all on the same page, then we're going to do that. So I think back to my clarity and transparency, having that discussion around, all right, well, if we all collectively want these 15 things, obviously the budget's a lot more items, but if we want all of these things, and the cost of those things is a certain amount, which is more than our current tax structure will bear, then okay, we've all aligned on what we want, and now here's what we're gonna have to do to get there. So I'm happy to have that conversation about any tax increases, but I'm also happy to have a conversation about different uses of funds that keep taxes the same or even lower.
What's your view on the township's relationship with the Center Region Council of Governments, and what kind of value do you find in that regional collaboration and consolidation of services?
My understanding is that the intent was to make sure that everybody's talking and kind of getting on the same page, and that there isn't kind of one thing done on one corner, and then when you hit the border there's something different, kind of having that nice gel and mesh, and kind of having shared services. And I think for what it is today, I think there's good sharing of services and good crosstalk. I think the complexities of 2023 are different from the complexities of when those first documents were signed in the last century, and so we just need to probably clarify what those documents say, how folks are supposed to kind of work together. I've seen some examples of changes necessary, when they set up the park authority, for instance, and having the authority, but also this the CRPR, two different organizations, one funded, one unfunded, kind of charged to do stuff, and so it gets a little wonky, at least from what I recall, the way those structures work.
Yeah. Okay. The township is considering changes to the ordinance for what's known as the Terrace Streetscape District, the West College Corridor, including limiting building heights there. What, if anything, would you like to see done to shape how that West College Avenue corridor develops in the future?
I think bottom line is what does the community want, first and foremost. And I've heard from several community members about, hey, we've got some height here. Well, let's not go from that to half of that next door, right? Let's keep a little height as we go down and kind of slowly scale it down. And I think it's a great idea. But are we all aligned on that? So really making sure that immediate community. I don't live, and 2 blocks away from there, so I'm not immediately impacted. But I know what beauty is. I know what scaling down is as a developer in my past. I know what I think it should be, but obviously the people that are right there probably know best.
Right. Over on North Atherton Street, there's a proposal for a gas station convenience store at the West Aaron Drive intersection, and that's raised some concerns among neighboring residents primarily about traffic. In that kind of situation, how would you go about addressing those concerns while still recognizing, a business has a legal right in that sort of zoning to be there?
Yeah, and I don't know the specifics of like what's allowed and what's not, but if I understand correctly, they are asking maybe for some small adjustments to the right. And so I think the legal right is, all right, I can do a thing, but then I need some help. That's probably where the community's got a little bit of leverage. So if it's, hey, I'm just building a thing and everything I've spec'd out meets every single ordinance and the policy out there, and everybody should just be stamping yes, right? But there's also agreed that, if somebody right next door is like, man, this is going to tank whatever I have next door, right? It's having that dialogue about it. I guess as, supervisors are not in the business of business, right? So the business people need to handle their business, but certainly should be in the driving spirit of collaboration.
Right. Well, we're just about out of time, but I'll give you last word here to share anything else you would like with the voters.
Well, I want to thank you. Thanks, CNET, for putting this on. I think that there's a clear choice. We have, Patty Stevens, Jeremy Thompson, Matt Heller, myself, 4 people that are really solid candidates, and putting a board together that works together, maybe not always agreeing, but certainly working together, very important, and has the ear of the current county commissioners, Mark Higgins and Amber Concepcion, to kind of, in that spirit of collaboration, it's township-county collaboration, working with Scott Conklin, Paul Takak, that's township-state collaboration. And so I think we're going to do some really good things as a board, if elected. And I just hope and ask for everyone's vote.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Omar.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
We've been talking with Omari Patterson, Democratic candidate for at-large supervisor in Ferguson Township. All candidates in this race have been invited to take part in a CNET interview. Election day is Tuesday, November 7th, and you can also vote by mail. For more information, contact the Center County Office of Elections or visit centercountyvotes.gov. I'm Jeff Rushton of statecollege.com. Thanks for joining us, and please be sure to vote. Hello, and welcome to CNET's 2023 election coverage. I'm Jeff Rushton of StateCollege.com. Today we're profiling the race for Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. And with me today is Republican at-large candidate David Wolfang. David, thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about the issues in Ferguson Township.
Well, David, to start, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and why you're running.
Okay, well, thank you. David Wolfgang. Been a resident of Ferguson Township for 30 plus years, but grew up in central Pennsylvania, just down the road a little bit, near Port Royal. I was a private veterinarian in private large animal practice for 14 years. I worked at the university for 20 plus years, and then served as a state veterinarian for a little over 3 years. And so my background is in veterinary medicine, but much of that time has been in consulting, food safety, and some animal welfare topics.
Right. And, why did you decide to run for the Board of Supervisors?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, again, because of sort of my background in sort of as a consultant problem solving, having children that grew up in the township and a wife that worked at the university for 25 years, very familiar with the township and the issues. And as I retired, I thought I have some skills and some knowledge that I believe would benefit the residents of the township. I think I understand a lot of the issues, and I've served as a problem solver consultant for a while, so I think I'm a good individual to help identify the issues and look for consensus and smart ways to move forward.
In 2021, the township instituted the stormwater management fee. How do you feel that has worked out so far, and would you do anything differently or change anything about it?
Well, first, I believe that Central Pennsylvania has a key role to play in stormwater management. With the Susquehanna Basin, and we're part of that drainage area, it's important that we participate as necessary, as required by DEP and EPA. That being said, our township could and has fulfilled all the requirements of DEP and EPA with the cost of about $400,000. Our neighboring townships, even the borough, do not exceed those requirements. The current stormwater fee greatly expands what's required of the township beyond what EPA and DEP require. That's put a really financial burden, especially on small businesses. There's lots of forgiveness for individual houses, forgiveness for farms, but our small businesses are paying considerable fees for the stormwater abatement. And I believe that the stormwater abatement strategy is in excess of what's required. We certainly want to do our part and a little bit extra to keep water clean, but I do believe the stormwater fees, as they're currently outlined, are in excess. If you look at the capital improvement plan for the future, it's extensive and expansive and expensive, what's planned, but much beyond what I think is necessary to meet the needs of stormwater abatement in this township.
Ferguson Township hasn't had a real estate tax increase since 2006. How important is it to you to continue that, and how do you go about balancing that with the need to continue or even improve services?
Yeah, well, Ferguson Township is unique in that we have the earned income tax and a property tax. Most of the other areas around State College, all the other townships, base primarily their income stream on a property tax. Now, the property tax, in some ways, is a little bit unfair, in that especially as our population ages, the burden for people who have invested years in their property is high when often their income is reduced. What I think makes more sense is to have balanced growth within Ferguson Township. That is, some new houses. We really have a dearth of new houses in our township. Township has built about 4 times more new houses for middle-income families than Ferguson has. Our regulations, our transfer tax are higher than everyone else in the area. So we don't build middle-income houses, and that's really new families that are growing their income. And so if we had some modest growth, balanced growth, smart growth in the township, we could maintain our property tax where it is, and as income comes in, as earners come in, then we can balance those needs for income growth. The income stream for the township will improve because it's balanced between new housing, workforce housing, and property tax and income from businesses. I think that is much more fair than putting a burden on property tax when sometimes people are property rich and income poor.
Well, speaking of workforce housing, the township has made some changes to its workforce housing ordinance over the past couple of years. But, do you think that there's anything more that can be done to increase the stock of affordable workforce housing?
Certainly. Again, our regulations, our transfer tax, a number of the fees that people pay in Ferguson Township, and just the hassle of building houses in Ferguson Township is much greater than our neighbors. And so what happens is people say, hey, can I build in Patton Township or can I build in Ferguson Township? They build in Patton Township. So we need to look at our regulation strategy. We need to look at our transfer tax. We need to look at other impediments that keep people from building it. Because right now in Ferguson Township, we build some $700,000, $800,000, $1 million houses. We build condominiums for graduate students or students. We don't really build workforce housing right now. And we need to look at that and balance that so we have a modest amount of growth in that middle income area where new families, startups, people can come in and buy a house at a reasonable price. But it's partly regulation and partly some taxes, some tax structure we have that inhibits that.
What's your view on the township's relationship with the Center Region Council of Governments? And, do you find value in that regional collaboration and consolidation of services?
Very much so, and I believe our township was a leader for decades in regional growth and regional plans. In the past half a dozen years or so, we sort of slipped from that, more of a follower, maybe even some people might say more of a blockage towards regional things. I believe it's critical for the area to grow as a region. If we all grow together, then we all thrive together. So I'm very supportive of COG and other regional initiatives. I do believe as a township supervisor, you need to balance what's good for the region along with what's good for your township. And I believe if you take a leadership role, I was just talking earlier about, we need to look at horizons, 5-year horizon, 10-year horizon, 15, 25-year horizons. When you have leadership that's been in power, in force for a while, and they've understand what's going on and the plans from the past, they can project better towards the future. Our township has lost almost all of its senior leadership. We've had many supervisors not serve their full term. We've had key leaders within the staff leave, and so that institutional knowledge has been lost. And so we don't have at this time leadership within the township that can see not only what the current issues are, but how that's going to impact the near and far term. And so I think it's important to be players, and important players, and key players, and collaborate to make it better for everyone in the township. Again, it's extremely important that we look at cross coverage for fire and rescue, for emergency care, for medical care, for libraries, for just growth, for business, for workforce housing. All those issues can be addressed better when we look at them on a regional scale versus an individual township.
Over on North Atherton Street at the West Aaron Drive intersection, there's been a proposal for a Wawa convenience store there. And the Overlook Heights neighborhood residents have expressed concerns about how that traffic is going to impact them. In a situation like that, how do you go about, addressing neighborhood concerns while at the same time, kind of recognizing that zoning allows for certain things and that, the township is open for business?
It's very important, I believe, to listen to the constituents that have to live there with the consequences. And that's part of this idea of looking at the pros and cons, the short-term, long-term consequences. I believe that is a business district. I'm not sure that we can erase that from the sort of equation. That being said, there are things we can do to mitigate the impact on the neighborhood. Township, we can put speed bumps to minimize how fast traffic flows through the area. We can talk about lighting and how we can sort of shield the lighting so that the light is more towards the commercial area, does not impact the neighborhood. We can talk about sound and ordinances and things like that that infect the neighborhood. And so I believe there are things that we can do to mitigate the impact, allow that business to thrive on that, keep the business and the busyness of the business on Atherton, minimize the through traffic through the Overlook Heights area down Allen Street, minimize the desire for people to travel down that way so that we can sort of maximize the benefits, minimize the impacts. And so I think mitigation as best as we can so that the impacts on the neighborhood are as sheltered and shielded as best as we can.
The township is right now looking at some changes to the ordinance for the Terrace Streetscape
Yes.
District, the West College corridor there. And namely that involves limiting future building heights. Is there anything you think should happen to shape how that West College corridor develops in the future?
Yes, and again, as I talked before about the idea of looking at 5, 10, 15-year horizons, that the streetscape area along there needs to be addressed in more of a transition. So we basically come out of a neighborhood, low buildings, and suddenly you bump up against 5- and 6-story buildings. That transition's not very gentle, and it probably makes that transition more difficult. The other things that probably were not looked at closely enough is just the impact on traffic, the impact on buses. The new building has a bus stop, but there's no cutout for the bus. So that bus is going to stop on West College, right in the middle of traffic, probably at 8 a.m. in the morning when the traffic is the heaviest in that. And so now suddenly you're going to have people tempting to cut around the outside of it. And so we have to think about, if we're going to put buildings like that in there, what are some other consequences? The same thing, all of those buildings, retail space underneath there, there's relatively little area to pull off a service truck. So if you're bringing supplies in, you want to service that retail business in that first floor, where do they park? Well, they didn't think about that. And so now suddenly you're putting them down a small alley in the back that's not designed for tractor trailers. And so I think that the planning has to be a little more broad-based to look at all the consequences. And I believe that that area should have a more transitional thing, so more of a slope, let's say. We get into larger buildings, when we get into downtown, we think of maybe 3-story buildings, and then slope down more into a more transition so that that is not an abrupt. And then think about all the consequences, the traffic, the sewer, the water, the student traffic, where they're going to park, where the cars are going to be, where they're going to shop. And how do you make that a better transition rather than just putting a large building in there and saying, okay, now we have this 5-story building in here, how are we going to deal with the traffic, how are we going to deal with all the other amenities that go with a large building in that space? So I'm going to say, as part of the planning, part of the COG, part of the regional thing, that area should be a plan between the borough, the university, and the township. Not just, okay, it's in Ferguson Township, now you deal with it. We have to think about all those impacts and how that makes sense sort of across the spectrum.
Well, we're just about out of time, so I'll give you this opportunity to share anything else you would like to with the voters before we go.
Well, again, I'm honored and privileged and a little bit humbled that people thought that I could do this job and do it well. That being said, I do think my background allows me to look at issues broadly. I've been a consensus builder. I've done a lot of work with different groups over the years. Again, I was in regulatory veterinary medicine. I was a bureau chief, bureau director at Harrisburg, about 130 people under my direct supervision, so to speak. Was in that regulatory environment for a number of years. I was at Penn State, where we had budgets and grant budgets, $10,000, $20,000, a couple $1 million. So I've had to deal with budgets. And in that environment, reports, timelines, get money, make sure you record how you spend that money carefully. Don't spend more than you get. And I was in private business for a long time, and I know what it means as a private business person to have people want your services, that you need to earn those services, you need to provide value for your service, and you need to be careful with your finances so that you not only earn their respect, but you're profitable enough that you can stay in business. And so with that background, I think I'm qualified to do this job. Again, honored that people would consider me and would vote for me, and I'll do my very best to honor their commitment and my commitment to them.
Well, thank you for joining us today, David. We've been talking with David Wolfgang, Republican at-large candidate for the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors. All candidates in this race have been invited to take part in a CNET interview. Election Day is Tuesday, November 7th, and you can also vote by mail. For more information, visit centercountyvotes.gov. I'm Jeff Rushton of statecollege.com. Thanks for joining us, and please be sure to vote.